Testing.
You're going to introduce that, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So each year the city is required to have their financial statements audited. So our current external auditors are KPMG, and they come on site 2 times per year. So they come in the fall to do an interim audit, and then they do the complete audit in the spring. And then as Ms. Liette Emer Bates, or Bates Emer, will tell you that they will come back in March. So in the fall, KPMG comes to you and gives you an overview of what their audit approach is going to be. So on your agenda today, that's what she's here to do. So I will ask her to come up and give her presentation.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bates Emer, good morning, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Morning, everyone. So thanks, Laura. My name is Liette Bates Emer. I'm the Audit Engagement Partner. Also on the engagement team is our Senior Manager, who has been on the file for a couple of years, Sarah Burden, and Lenora Lee is our Engagement Quality Review Partner. I'm going to speak to some of the highlights in our plan, not everything in this report. So I'll push us forward here to our determination of materiality for the year for this audit. So materiality is the figure that we establish in planning for an audit, and it is meant to represent the level of error that could change a user's decision when looking at the financial statements or making decisions based off of the review of the financial statements. For the city's audit, we use a gross benchmark of total expenses to come up with this materiality figure. This is sort of the requirement under the auditing standards when you're in a not-for-profit or a break-even environment. So we can be anywhere from 0.5 to 3% of this benchmark to determine our materiality. We're at about 2%, and our materiality is $3.7 million, which is consistent with what we had used last year. With the materiality of $3.7 million, we do report back to the committee any differences that we find throughout our audit procedures that are greater than $185,000, both that may have been corrected or that remain uncorrected in the results of the audit. Oops. There we go. So sort of in general, I don't think there's really any significant changes from the audit plan that we have presented in the past or what our approach has been in the past. You know, we have the same risks identified, which is the one required by professional standards, which is the risk of fraud due to management override of controls, which we address through our procedures around testing of journal entries, looking at any estimates or unusual transactions. Our areas of audit focus are again planned to be sort of the same as in prior years. We do point out that there is a new auditing standard effective for this year's audit. That's the CAS 315, identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement. So this will require us to have a bit of a more robust risk assessment, looking at all of your processes throughout the city for financial reporting, as well as taking a little bit of a deeper look at the IT systems that you have. We also do note in the report that there is a new accounting standard upcoming for the 2023 audit for the city. We've been talking about this for the last several years leading up to this, which will occur next year, which is the Asset Retirement Obligations Standard. And management has already started the process of reviewing your assets for any retirement obligations and is working towards this for adoption next year. At this stage of the audit, we have done inquiries with management with regards to fraud, and we do pose these questions again in our report to those charged with governance related to fraud. The timeline of our audit, Laura has mentioned. We have been out and performed our interim procedures. Done our various inquiries with management, and then we do plan to return in March to do our field work with reporting back to yourselves in April.
Thank you very much. Questions from anyone? I'm not seeing any. Thank you. Appreciate the presentation this morning. Ms. Mercer, any further comments on this?
No, Your Worship, but we're gearing up for year end, so the staff are trying to get all their papers shuffled and processed, and so we can hit the ground running in January.
Thank you very much. The next item would be delegations. We don't have any, so we're on to reports, grants, rebates, and exemptions. Ms. Mercer,
Thank you.
Please.
Thanks. So with 5 reports on the agenda today relating to grants, staff thought the committee would benefit from a high-level overview of all the grants, rebates, and exemptions that the city has available. So each program has its own criteria and guidelines, and most are application-based. So I won't go through each one of these in detail today, but I will give just a brief high-level overview summary. So the largest financial impact comes from the cash grants, and we have 7 subcategories of cash grants. So we have operating grants, and so we have multiple line items in the budget for operating grants, so that's a Port Theatre, VIX grounds, and the Namo Area Land Trust, to name a few of them. We have 2 grants relating to social planning, and both are on today's agenda for allocation. We have 3 grants that are associated with culture and events. And again, all 3 of those are included on the agenda today for allocation. We have 2 heritage grants, 4 recreation and sport grants, and 3 sustainability grants. So the Community Environmental Sustainability Project grant is new for 2023 and is on the agenda today for allocation. And lastly, we have miscellaneous grants, and we have 5 of those. And the Neighborhood Association grant is new for 2023 and is on today's agenda for discussion. No allocation, just a discussion of the program. The city also has 7 rebate programs, and most are administered by the city. However, one relating to the appliance rebate is administered through BC Hydro. And with this one, this grant or rebate is subject to availability by BC Hydro, and I believe currently they're not taking applications for this one. We do have 3 new sustainability rebate programs for 2023. So the EV charging infrastructure rebate, the home retrofit support rebate, and the home energy assessment rebate are new for this year. So in addition to cash grants and rebates, the city also has 5 tax exemption opportunities as well. And most of you are familiar with those. But there is a new one this year, and that is the Relief Program for Commercial Properties. So this is new provincial legislation that allows municipalities to apply a reduced tax rate to a portion of the land value for eligible commercial properties. So this program was just announced, so staff will come back early in the new year with a report updating you on what our options are for this. So if the committee is interested, staff can come back in the new year for a deeper discussion on grants, rebates, and exemptions, as that's kind of what we heard during our budget process, or budget deliberations this year. So I can come back with a presentation in the new year and kind of take a deeper dive into each one of these.
Councillor Himmons has a question, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Ms. Mercer, I'm curious, how do new programs get added to the list? So the community water, or pardon me, the environmental sustainability, is that attached to a policy like the neighborhood grants are?
Right, so those came through community planning, and those were put forward in this budget cycle and were included in the budget. And so those ones, I would have to have Mr. Lindsay comment on that as he walks in, just to go through the process that.
Yeah, thanks. It's just a general curiosity, because I remember the Neighborhood Association grant was attached to a policy that we approved. So are these other ones also attached to policies, or where are they coming from?
Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't know if I can speak to everyone on the list, but I know, for example, the watershed restoration program came specifically from a motion from council to ask for a business case, I think going back as far as 2020. And then we brought forward the guidelines and council approved those guidelines, but it came out of a specific motion from council to establish that program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I have on that. I'd be happy to take any other questions if you have any.
Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I'm just wondering how many grant opportunities do we actually turn down? Are there a lot? Is it something? I look forward to your deep dive too. I do look forward to that. Yeah.
So through your worship to Councillor Perino, in some cases, if they don't meet the criteria, they get turned down. That's, occasionally a few.
Okay.
But I know for, like, say, the culture operating and project grants, they may not get full funding, but they'll get a portion of funding. So unless you are not eligible to meet, you don't meet the criteria,
Okay.
in all likelihood, you'll get a portion. So, yeah.
So every one of the grants that we offer gets taken in the end. Is that correct? Would you say?
Most often, yes. You'll see on today's agenda, some we haven't fully subscribed, so we'll go back out again in the year and ask for another intake or take them as they come. Okay. But for the most part, yes, the grants are usually taken.
Interesting. Okay, thank you, Your Worship.
Any other questions for Ms. Mercer on this section? Not seeing any. The next is Culture and Event Grants 2023 funding recommendations. And that's Ms. Osborne. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. As you know, there are 3 City of Nanaimo grant streams that are administered through the Culture and Events section for a combined total of $510,139. In 2023, we have gone through the process of administering all of those funds. The report before you details the 13 operating grants. 7 are 1-year and 6 are 3-year. 19 project grants, and 12 Downtown Nanaimo Event Revitalization Fund grants. There was an integrated panel from 3 departments of staff that got together to review all of the applications that are before you in the recommendations. I think that this shows that this grant process has really demonstrated, once again, that the Nanaimo arts and culture community is thriving, and that the applications received are excellent examples of reflection of our tremendously impact that these organizations and events have on our community. The purpose of this report is to recommend that Council approve for 2023 the Culture and grants for operating, project, and downtown events, and to support the activities of nonprofit, culture, and heritage organizations, and to contribute to the success of the events and initiatives plans for the downtown. The recommendation is that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that Council approve the 2023 Culture Grant Funding, Operating, Project, and Downtown Event recommendations of $510,139,000 as follows in the report before you. I'm available, as well as Ms. Slum, who is our Culture Coordinator and oversaw this process, to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Eastmere.
Thank you for this. I was just wondering through, you know what I'm going to ask, which is whether or not we could remove one of them.
Exactly. I was going to say that maybe we'll just do questions first. Ms. Snellgrove, Councillor Eastmere has indicated to me she has a conflict with one of them, and so what I'm going to suggest when we've done the questions is that the motion be to approve all of them, save whatever item she will point out. We'll vote on that and then be able to, yes, okay. Thank you. Any questions, Councillor Eastmere, around the grants in general? No? Thank you. Then Councillors Hemmons and Perino in order, please.
Thank you. Through you to staff. I'm seeing in the report that the grant funds are assigned on a per capita basis. So does that mean that our grant funds for these streams fluctuate?
That is for the operating grants, and it's $3 per capita on a 5-year.
Okay. And when we do the deep dive, could I ask that we also have a historical look at how often we've bumped these up and when?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
Pardon me, I just asked for a historical kind of synopsis of when we've put the grant streams up, when we've increased them, when we've decreased them, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may interrupt proceedings, this again points out this morning why these have to come down and soon. Councillor Perino and then Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, some of them, I would, it would be great if, even if, when you go to do the deep dive thing, just even a short paragraph, one-liner, just as to what they are. Although, you know, whatever information you have, I think that Councillor Hemmons really asked the right question about what their history is, because I look at some of these and I'm like, you really can get by on $800? You know, I'm like, this is enough to keep going with, or is that what they asked for? Or is that just what we gave?
Through His Worship to Councillor Perino, it's what we were able to accommodate within what we had. Majority of them asked for
A lot more.
Yeah. And so they are able to ask for 25% in the project and operating of their overall budget and 35% for their event, downtown event. A large portion of them received less than what they had asked for.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
As the old song goes, you can't always get what you want, but sometimes you get what you need. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, thank you for this. I'm just looking at, there's 27 successful applicants for culture operating and project, and then there's 1 unsuccessful applicant and 3 that are ineligible. I get the ineligible ones, and then 1 unsuccessful for the downtown event. What are those applications? Is there the ability for council to see these individual applications? And I get that there's a limited amount of funding, and requests for funding are $150,000 over what's available, but I'm just curious about the ones that weren't successful.
Through His Worship to Councillor Manley, the unsuccessful grants were, the reason why they would have not received funding were that they were incomplete or missing important information, or perhaps they were events or projects happening outside of the city of Nanaimo, membership outside of the city of Nanaimo, or deemed ineligible based on the content of their project.
Okay,
So-
because there's 3 that are listed as ineligible and 1 that's just unsuccessful.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the one that was unsuccessful was either incomplete, which would make it ineligible as well, or?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. And a general question to you, Ms. Osborne, perhaps Ms. Rudolph can assist. Is it fair to say that in comparison to communities of similar size where we sit in terms of these kinds of grants, are we generous? Are we parsimonious?
His Worship, I believe we're generous. Perhaps
Mr. Rudolph.
Rudolph could speak to that.
My observation is I think the city is very generous, whether it's the history of accommodating and supporting a variety of groups in the city. Compared to some of the other cities I work for, it's considerably higher here. But I think it's important to look at that. I cited an example when I was explaining this to the mayor yesterday, that when I was down east, we had a city, we looked at the total amount of money that was spent on grants. And council was looking for avenues to save money. So they took that amount of money and they said, reduce it by 25%, and then figure out within that 1.5 million, or that it was a lesser amount at that time, how to dole that out according to criteria. So there's the fiscal side is there, and I think you have to be mindful of that. So I wouldn't say that we're out of line, but there's a tradition and a heritage here of supporting a myriad of groups, and a large part of the work program that Ms. Osborne and others in her department do is help to support in different ways those organizations behind the scenes. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that we do in addition to the actual dollar amount. You know, I recall some of the conversations around the Blues Festival this fall and how much, a lot of extra work, and there's been a lot of turnover in some of these boards and new people, and there's a lot of extra work that's going into that. So yeah, we could do a bit of a fiscal analysis if you wanted on the whole thing, and maybe a history. I think you're asking for the history and globally, but I would say, you know, and I'm not seeing a lot of controversy in terms of the amount of money that's being put into this by inputs from people, but and certainly the user community is probably very appreciative of the work that council is doing to support the organization. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but it is a noteworthy thing.
Thank you very much, and I raise it only to point it out to the public this morning, lest people be critical of what the city is or isn't doing with respect to this. Personally, I think, and I suspect I can speak for council safely, that most of us are pretty familiar with all of these organizations, and they create a wonderful, diverse community, and it's certainly worth supporting. Councillor Thorpe.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and I was going to make some similar type of comment through you, if I may. Thank you, Ms. Osborne, for this information. I think it's really important that the public is aware, first of all, of the amount of money that the city does distribute in terms of grant funding. I think it's also very important that people realize that there is strict criteria for each and all of these grants, each and every grant, and that they are carefully scrutinized, and that there also, as a follow-up to that, is accountability on the part of the groups that receive this funding, that they have to justify how they have used the money and that it was well spent. And I just would like you to confirm that.
Through His Worship to Councillor Thorpe, absolutely. There's a significant process involved in the application. And then throughout the course of the year, there's an interim reporting process and a complete review process at the end.
Thank you. And I'll be honest that there is one grant that I have some qualm about and would be curious to know what the application looked like, but I'm not going to nitpick today in an open meeting. I really respect the process of how these are determined. It's a very tough job to wade through all of the applications and look at their merits, determine how much money they're worthy to receive out of a rather limited pot, although we are fairly generous. I know that in past years, this used to be done through a committee of council, and unfortunately, in my opinion, it became very political and a very almost unfair process. I really like the way it's set up now. As you've indicated, staff getting together from different areas and making professional decisions. So appreciate that very much. I know it's hard work. And I guess the other comment, again, building on what the mayor mentioned, was if council chose, I suppose we could scrap this entire program and take $500,000 out of the budget. And maybe that would please a small handful of people, but I think it would really be detrimental to the good of our community. I think this is a good investment in our arts and culture and event societies, and they bring a lot to our city. So I'm pleased to support this process and the recommendations when we get something on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thorpe. Ms. Snellgrove, maybe the appropriate motion is to approve all of the grants, save and accept one, and we'll then have, we can vote on that and then have Councillor Eastmere step out. Would that be?
Yes, that would be appropriate. We just need to know which one to exclude during this motion.
Councillor Eastmere, please.
Yes, thank you. It's the grant for the Vancouver Island Short Film Festival.
Okay. All right, and you're moving the motion then to approve all of the grants, save and accept that one.
Thank you.
And seconded Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Councillor Eastmere.
Sorry, through the chair, could we have clarification if Councillor Gesselbrock is still on the line? His camera is off.
Without revealing too many secrets at the school, I think it was a tough night with baby Gesselbrock.
Okay.
So
Sorry about that. That was unintentional. I'm sitting right here. I thought it was on.
Okay, thank you. And you're voting in favor?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
thank you very much. Then Councillor Eastmere, if you can absent yourself for a minute, we'll deal with the other item.
And through the chair to Councillor Eastmere, we just need to know the reason for the conflict before she leaves, please.
Pardon me, my partner is employed by the film festival at the moment.
I think that's a pretty good reason.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we would need a motion to approve that recommendation.
Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Manley. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Osborne, thank you for your work, and to echo what Councillor Thorpe had to say, I think Council really does appreciate that it's a process out of our hands. It has independence to it, and I think, frankly, the lack of complaints indicates that it's working well, so that's a very positive thing. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the next item is the Community Program Development Grant, Nanaimo Men's Resource Centre. Ms. Osborne, please.
The Community Program Development Grant is administered through Community Recreation. The intent of the Community Program Development Grant is to assist community groups and organizations to develop new or expand programs that provide increased opportunity for residents to participate and connect within their community. The grant is intended to seed funding to help new programs specifically and events off of the ground and expand existing programs perhaps to include more in the hopes of them becoming self-sustainable. Community Recreation staff have reviewed the application before you submitted by the Men's Resource Centre for a Father's Day event open to all at Maffeo Sutton Park. This is from the first intake of the 2023 process. The purpose is to obtain council approval for the Community Program Development Grant, and the recommendation is that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that council approve the request for the Men's Resource Centre for a Community Development Grant in the amount of $3,500 to assist in funding their Father's Day event in the park at Maffeo Sutton Park. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perino?
Thank you, Your Worship, and again through you. So I just don't quite understand the issue of the available in the fund, the 15,000, and the will remain in the grant fund, 11,500. So can you just explain that for me? Thank you.
Through His Worship to Councillor Perino.
Thank you.
We have $15,000 available in the grant, and the first intake would be this total of 3,500.
So do you then come back to us asking for the additional? Is that how it works?
Through His Worship to Councillor Perino, we have a second intake, and depending on what applications we receive, we'll come back to you with recommendation for further spend.
Okay, thank you so much.
Got a little money in the piggy bank. Anyone care to make the recommended motion? Moved Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Osborne. The next is the emergency boiler replacement at the Nanaimo Aquatic Centre. Mr. Groot, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Worship, Council. Thanks very much. So this is an information report in front of you, just a full picture of the events from the November 4th windstorm, which led, unfortunately, to equipment failure at the Nanaimo Aquatic Centre. Staff initially thought that the singular boiler would be able to be repaired. It's currently a 3-unit system with kind of a redundancy built in, so we were able to be limping along with the 2 units and schedule a repair, and then shortly after that, a second unit started to see the same kind of results from the windstorm and the brownouts that happened in that area. And so as a result, it was determined that the money spent on trying to make those repairs was too great also from a risk perspective to spend all that money and then not know if the boilers could last until A, we had grant approval, or B, replacement scheduled in 2025. So that's when staff, working with finance, determined that replacement of the system was a far more beneficial route to go. So myself and Ms. McCaskill are here to answer any questions, should there be any.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Groot? Not seeing any. Report's helpful. I appreciate it very much. It's just a report, not asking for a motion this morning. So here's to hot water. The next item is the Richardson Road Water Project Budget Adjustment. Mr. Sims, good morning and welcome.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Good morning, Council. Just the report in front of you is one of many that you've seen in the last several months asking for a budget adjustment. So Richardson Road it's a simple asset management driven water main replacement on Richardson from where we've left off in the past to the end. So this kind of completes that project. The good news is we've got 6 bids in from the marketplace, which is an improvement in conditions. The bad news is that we're not seeing prices come back down yet. But the tightness of the lower 2 bids indicates it's a solid number, and it's a marketable, market appropriate number, if I can use that. The low bid at $863,000 is approximately $100,000 over our budget, which was prepared over a year ago. And so an additional $200,000 to allow for the low budget, as well as a little bit of contingency, is the recommended motion. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sims. Councillor Perino, you never let me down.
Can't help myself, Your Worship, can't help myself. So this is strictly, it's over what we had anticipated, simply by inflation costs, is that correct?
That is correct. It is purely driven by inflation. The supply chain issues, and just fuel and everything. Everyone's had this bump. Ask anybody trying to buy anything, anywhere.
Anything anywhere, yeah, that's right.
Especially with construction, utility construction, we've really been hit hard.
Thank you.
As some may recall, if the public's been listening the last few weeks, when I raised the issue of the cost of a meter of sidewalk with Mr. Sims, he wasn't sure about the amount, and he's assured by Mr. Rosen that instead of talking in the hundreds, it's costing between $2,000 and $3,000 for a meter of sidewalk now. So I just want to send out a signal to the community that the inflation in the construction sector in particular is significant, and it has enormous impact on us. And when I say us, I mean the City of Nanaimo and Council and staff trying to manage budgetary matters. And this morning's discussion, how shall I say, is just further evidence of how challenging that is. And particularly, this is one of the most basic things we do, which is deliver water, clean, potable water that people can safely drink and wash with. I'm not, Councillor Hemmons is moving the motion. Seconded Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Sims. The next is the Neighborhood Association Grant Program Guidelines and Criteria. Mr. Lindsay, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, Your Worship. And we're going to continue with the theme of grants this morning, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Brinkman, whose team has been working on with Council through your GPC on neighborhood associations and is here to introduce this report this morning.
Good morning, Ms. Brinkman. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Your Worship. So neighborhood associations are independent, voluntary organizations in the city that advocate for the shared interests of residents of a neighborhood. And in April 2022, Council adopted a neighborhood association supports policy, which states that a new neighborhood association grant program be established. So the policy resulted from a consultation process during, I think, 2020 and 2021 to determine how the city should support our neighborhood associations. The purpose of the grant program is to strengthen the organizational capacity of existing and newly created neighborhood associations, to increase the frequency of community events in the neighborhoods, and to help build community identity and cohesion. The grant funds may be used to offset costs for operational needs such as liability insurance, printing, online meeting platforms, software, website development, and smaller neighborhood events to support the associations. An amount of $10,000 has been included in the 2023 financial plan for the Neighborhood Association Grant Program. And as there are currently 14 neighborhood associations that meet the organizational criteria as outlined in the policy, it is anticipated that approximately $700 could be dispersed to each association if they were to all apply for the funds. A very simple application process is proposed, with the primary criteria to be that each association report back in December, so at the end of the year, to demonstrate the funds were used for eligible expenses. Once this grant program is established, funds could be distributed earlier in the year to allow for the full 12 months to use the funds. So.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Brinkman? Councillor Hemmons, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm really excited to see this. I recall that there was a relationship in the policy, the report we received on the neighborhood grants and neighborhood engagement overall, that said that we were also going to do smaller planning cycles with neighborhoods and offer a Planning 101 workshop. Is that kind of to come, and this is just, we're just dealing with the financials now, or is that wrapped into this?
No, for certain, community planning is putting their minds to how to implement the Neighborhood Association Supports Policy. So this is sort of the first piece we wanted to get out the door with the new budget so that the funds could be used by the Neighborhood Association in 2023. We also have an event planned, hopefully with council, that we're organizing for the spring of 2023. So that's one of the items in the policy as well. So you will see more of the items in that policy rolling out in 2023.
Great, thank you, that's exciting. And I just want to confirm that if a neighborhood association applies for this, that won't preempt them from applying for another, say, community vitality grant.
Thank you, through your worship. That's a good question, and we had that discussion as well. And so I think, you know, we will have to evaluate as we receive the different applications, but you can see what's recommended through the Vitality Grant is to give one grant to a neighborhood association, but it is for a larger event. I think the amount is around $2,400. So I think under the neighborhood grant program, it would just be more smaller events, you know, smaller meetings, supplies for smaller meetings. So I can see that that may be how things unfold.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. In order, Councillor Sprino and Manley, please.
Thank you, Worship. And my question is about, you said 700 to 1,000. So not everyone will get a portion automatically. They have to apply for it. Is that correct?
We would like to see a bit of an application process, some thought put into how they might use the funds.
Excellent.
Not rigorous process because
right.
it's not a large amount, but still some.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't have any type of a grant fund for those neighborhood associations that are requesting, say, for example, cameras or, you know, for assistance in crime prevention and so forth. We have nothing of that type, do we?
Ms. Mercer, please.
We have some, nothing per se like that. We do have the other grant category that does allow us to provide funding for capital projects
Yes.
up to, I think, $5,000.
Yes.
So there is some limit, but it's very limited funding.
Okay. I just wondered because, of course, when I first looked at this, I thought, well, that's not enough to do anything financially in the way of capital, but it certainly fits the bill for, as you said, paper, website, things like that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Ms. Brinkman. I'm just curious about before this grant application process was available, what were the neighborhood associations applying? They could apply for other granting streams, and was there a lot of requests for just kind of general expenses like this?
Thank you, through your worship. So a lot of the requests for printing and those kinds of supports were coming actually directly through staff, and just, you know, happening in that way, you know, copies of city plan or official community plans or neighborhood plans. So this process maybe more formalizes that process and maybe gives more equity to the different neighborhood associations to know that that's available rather than kind of ad hoc.
So they're all encouraged to apply for whatever their needs are.
Correct.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any of the further questions. I just want to say thank you to staff for the work on this. I think it's a great, how shall I say, a great report and an excellent process. Councillor Thorpe, sorry.
Thanks, Your Worship. If there's no other comments or questions from staff, I'm prepared to move the recommendation, but I would like to speak to it.
Please, and seconded, Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I just wanted to thank staff for this as well. I think this really shows Council and the city's commitment to supporting neighborhood associations. I think it also relates to our earlier discussion about grant streams and the need for criteria which are fair and well-known, and also accountability. And I think we heard from neighborhood associations during last term that some are much more formally organized than others, but I think there needs to be a certain level of criteria in order to apply for city money, and I think the criteria that you've established here is very reasonable and quite attainable by any neighborhood association that wishes to get up and running. So pleased to support this, and thank you for your work.
Thank you very much. If no further discussion, all those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Noting the hour, Ms. Snellgrove, I'm going to suggest we take the morning break then.
It's up to council.
Thank you. We're taking the morning break.
This is the 2018 redux of the lighting at Nanaimo's historic bastion. I've had the pleasure of being part of the relighting project on this amazing building in downtown Nanaimo. So what we did is we've replaced the original high-pressure sodium lights, which basically did an okay job of lighting up the bottom 10 feet of the building, and replaced them with modern LED lighting that has the capacity to change color. We can run through a number of different colors that we have pre-programmed here in a pink, a purple, a green. Probably my favorite on here is Rainbow Chase for Pride Week. It'll actually run all the way around the building all the time.
With this new technology, organizations can now request that the bastion be lit to promote their cause by going to the City Nanaimo website and following the instructions. Go to Your Government, Bastion Lighting Requests, complete the lighting request form, and submit. You will hear from us within a couple days if your request has been approved, and the bastion will be lit in the colors that you have requested. If you have any questions, please contact the Mayor's office at 250-755-4400.
So the next time you're in downtown Nanaimo at night, come on and check out the new dynamic lighting at the Bastion.
This is Nanaimo, and it's a city that's growing. With over 100,000 people now calling Nanaimo home, the demands on our infrastructure have never been greater. From the streets that interweave and connect us all together, to the facilities that we recreate in, to the parks that offer us an escape to nature, there's one significant guiding force that makes it all possible: the city budget.
So the city collects money from a variety of different sources, including user fees, government grants, casino revenues, investment income, etc. However, property taxes are the main source of income for the city and account for about 60% of the total revenues collected.
Regardless of which neighborhood you live in, property taxes have helped shape nearly every aspect of the city.
The budget continues to focus on public safety and provides support to our most vulnerable populations. However, property taxes also fund everything from the police and fire services that show up when you call 911 to the streets being plowed when it snows, as well as sports fields being mowed and all the cultural and recreational amenities that the city has to offer.
As well as property taxes, rates based on actual usage, or user rate fees, fund the services and infrastructure that keep Nanaimo flowing. Imagine even a day without clean, healthy drinking water, curbside recycling waste and organics pickup, and sewers for wastewater. These all protect public health and the environment.
Utility user rate bills are sent out 3 times per year and pay for water, sanitary, sewer, and waste collection services. So these fees contribute to the budget and pay for operating expenditures, investment in new and renewed infrastructure, as well as any debt repayment for these utilities.
Like a bicycle, a car, or even a home, all of the city's infrastructure degrades over time. Maintenance planning, lifespan, and replacement has to be scheduled and accounted for.
The city has stewardship over $3 billion in assets and has 3 asset management reserves to help fund the replacement of these. Since 2013, property taxes have increased by 1% per year to fund asset management.
The city's infrastructure also allows for a great variety of recreational opportunities, like all of the great programming found in the quarterly Parks, Recreation, and Culture activity guides.
Registration and drop-in fees help reduce the amount of taxation needed to fund these recreational services. So these services are not fully funded through user fees, but they do help keep recreation alive in Nanaimo.
And of course, Nanaimo's infrastructure, city services, and recreation programming are all managed by People Power. Rounding out the benefits of the budget, the city also plans for arts, culture, and reconciliation opportunities that really give Nanaimo vibrancy and renewed appeal.
It takes a lot to keep our growing city running and provide the infrastructure and services that people not only want, but need. The annual budgeting process ensures that we can make that happen.
For an in-depth look at our budget, visit the city's website at www.nanaimo.ca. And while you're out there, enjoy the city that your tax dollars continue to build.
Our emergency routes, they are priority routes. They consist of roads that go to and from the hospitals, from the fire department stations, and from the BC ambulance stations. They're also their main commerce routes through the city of Nanaimo. So this allows commerce to happen during a snow event. So we hit those roads first. Once those are clear and open, then we move into the secondary roads, and then we move into the residential areas, which are dead-end roads and cul-de-sacs. And it can take up to 96 hours before we get into the residential areas. One of the side effects of plowing snow is it does end up on the sidewalk, and this can be very frustrating for homeowners and business owners that have just cleaned the sidewalk. It also pulls into their driveways. The crews try to keep it as close to the curb as they can, but we need to open the road right up to the curb to allow the drains to be exposed for when the snow starts to melt.
This is one of the City of Nanaimo Public Works snow and ice control vehicles. And this is actually set up for a brining unit right now, or anti-icing. And what brine is a 23.3% sodium chloride solution. And it comes out of the spray bars down here at the bottom, and it's made here at the Public Works Yard. It's a proactive method of snow and ice control, as when we know that there's a winter storm coming, we can actually lay this down on the road prior to the event.
By putting the brine down before the snow comes, it buys time, it lets us get on the roads, and then when we hit it with the plows, it doesn't stick. The snow doesn't stick, it comes off much easier. Whereas if we didn't brine, the snow has an opportunity to freeze to the road.
So another benefit of the brining or anti-icing unit is that during the frosty mornings, we can have it drive down the road, and then immediately the frost disappears as they're applying the brine.
Brine's a great tool for us. It's very cost effective. We can stretch our hard-pressed tax dollars to the maximum. We can make brine for cents on the dollar.
So the other thing that we ask is that everyone stays back from these anti-icing or any winter maintenance vehicles, as they have limited visibility and it's poor conditions out there, and they're trying to maneuver around everything. So just stay back and give them a little bit of room to operate and clear the roads.
So here we are in the Public Works Yard, City of Nanaimo, and what you look around, you can see our various tools that we use for snow and ice fighting. We have tandem trucks, 4x4 trucks, we have backhoes. All our trucks are capable of having front plows on them, and the larger trucks we have belly plows on them as well, and they all have a salter sander that can be mounted on the back.
This is another tool in our winter maintenance fleet. It's a salting machine. And what happens is that the salt gets loaded into this hopper, and on this conveyor where it gets hit with these two saddle tanks, which are full of brine. Then it comes out here on the spreader. And why we add the brine is that it reduces the amount of spray from the salt, so it doesn't bounce nearly as far, saving about 20 to 30% of our salt. As well, by using the anti-icing liquid on the salt, the activation starts right as it hits the road.
The purpose of the salt is to keep the roads bare, keep ice from forming on the road. Again, safety for everyone, including ourselves and the public. That's why we put the salt down.
Today we're talking about clearing catch basins or road drains on residential roads. The first thing to understand is where the catch basin is in proximity to your residence. When clearing a catch basin or road drain, we want to make sure that you make yourself visible and aware of oncoming traffic. When clearing snow or debris from a catch basin, we ask that you put it in an area where it will not plug the catch basin again, not placing it on an already shoveled driveway or sidewalk. Sandbags are available at 2020 Labio Road 24/7. Just remember to make sure you bring a shovel. The City of Nanaimo and Public Works appreciate your help in keeping your catch basins clear. Thank you.
Social Planning Grants 2023. And Mr. Lindsay, you're going to introduce this, I believe.
Just in time, Your Worship. Yes, and again, good morning. This is the Social Planning Grant Program has been going on since 2001, and Council currently has $85,000 annually in your budget to support this program. It's been traditionally for nonprofit groups, neighborhood associations, faith-based groups. Recommendations for 2023 are outlined in the report. It's noted that we're recommending $81,900 of the $85,000 be distributed at this time, which will leave a small $3,100 for future applications that could come forward throughout the year. Ms. Wood, who is the resident expert on this file, is here this morning and can answer any specific questions, but turn it back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. I was going to say, Ms. Wood, do you want to say something first before the questions start flying? Thank you. Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Your Worship. And my question is just that we just gave the funding, the issue of the funding for the community associations came out, and the very first one is the Departure Bay Neighborhood Association. So I was just surprised to see it on the list and not on the other list. You know,
Yeah, I think, Your Worship, I think that's something that next year, I think as applications come in, because this stream wasn't available at this time, this is just the Neighborhood Association grant this morning. We're just getting those guidelines approved. So there wasn't the opportunity for them to apply yet. This grant stream has been used, as you mentioned, from time to time for neighborhood association programs. If what's being proposed in the future is more appropriate to be with the neighborhood grant program, we'll recommend that they be considered there, which would free up more capacity under the social planning grant. So I suspect you'll see less neighborhoods apply under this stream in the future.
Your Worship, the reason I understand the answer, but I was just thinking that maybe they were doing something different. Then, because the other grant is quite small and more about, you know, selling themselves to their community and so forth. I get that. I thought maybe they were doing something different.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Perino, I think Ms. Brinkman, when she came up just recently, the question was posed whether neighborhood associations would be able to apply for other grant streams. And so this one is specific to, you know, bringing resiliency to neighborhoods and vitality. And so, you know, there was discussion about them being able to apply to this grant as well.
Yes.
For these larger events, because they are important for the neighborhoods and they wouldn't be covered under a smaller funding.
And so just my final thought is, this is great. I think it's wonderful. And this is where I hope the communication piece is about what these grants do, and what these organizations do with the money that they receive, because it's a celebration of them and the work that council does to make sure they get the funding that they have asked for. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I just have a question there, like just noting that some of these are moved from social response to community vitality. And is that just based on funding availability, or is that looking at applications and seeing that maybe it would be a better pot of money to have the application go through a different funding stream?
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Manley, yes, I think what you said is true. The community vitality grants are meant for smaller initiatives, where the social response grants are meant for programs or projects that are going to make a larger impact. And in particular, for these two funding applications, we did, you'll see in attachment C that our team created just listings of the past few years of people who were successful in getting these grants. And so these type of programs also followed under the community vitality grants. So we shifted those to that appropriate pot.
Okay. Again, I would just echo the words previous about the need in our community, and these are organizations that are really filling an important need in the community. So I'm very supportive of these applications and previous applications as well for arts and culture. Thanks.
Councillor Manley, not seeing anyone else with questions. Do you want to make them a recommended motion then?
Sure, so moved.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much, Ms. Wood. Mr. Lindsay. The next one, likewise, Mr. Lindsay, it's the Community Watershed Restoration Grant.
Thank you, Worship, and I think this is the last grant report you have on your agenda today. And we talked about this one briefly already this morning, but this is a grant program that was established specifically from council after receiving a business case back in 2020, and there's now $20,000 annually in your budget to support to support projects under the Community Watershed Restoration Stream. There's two applications that we're recommending receive grants, which will leave a balance of just under $12,000 for additional applications that could be received next year. Mr. Stewart.
Your Worship.
Sorry, Your Worship, I was just going to say Mr. Stewart's also here this morning in support if there's any specific questions.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thanks. I probably should abstain from the vote on this one. Just I think a family member is involved in one of the applications from my recollection.
Very good. Welcome to stay for any questions, though. I'll let you know when
Through the chair, it's not actually permitted for council members to abstain from voting, so that he would need to.
Well, I'm sorry, wrong language. The other words escaping
conflict
me.
of interest.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we knew what he meant.
Okay, so in that case, we'd put him in the Zoom waiting room for the entire discussion and vote.
Okay. All
Thank
right.
you.
You've been put in the waiting room. God, it's just like Star Trek. That dated me. Any other questions or comments on this one? No questions, Mr. Stewart? No? Councillor Perino. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the Wellington Action Committee for the Diver Lake water quality study, is there an anticipation of follow-up from that one? I just thought, gee, I'd love to see. I mean, are we looking at restoration in the future or anything like that, or?
Yeah, absolutely, through the chair. That's a water quality monitoring study to monitor the impact of our storm outflows on the quality of the lake. Okay. So those results will be shared with the city and the Ministry of Environment. So absolutely, it could lead to further projects down the line. I don't know what those are going to be. It's something we work with the Action Committee and other stakeholders on.
Excellent, thank you.
Don't think we've got the motion on the floor. No, exactly. So moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Thorpe. Any further discussion, questions? None. All those in favor? And any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
And we'll bring back in Councillor Gesselbach.
Yes. Magic. Welcome back, Councillor Gesselbrock. The next is item I, update of reserve policy. Ms. Mercer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So per the reserve policy, the policy is to be reviewed 3 years from the effective date. So the policy became effective July 22nd, 2019, and that makes 2022 the year for the first review. And I'm here today to present the updated policy. So we've had several reserve funds created, repealed, or revised, and this report summarizes all of those changes. So we've had two new reserves, the Off-Street Parking Reserve Fund and the Climate Action Reserve Fund. The off-street parking was created per Local Government Act requirements, and these are cash in lieu payments received under the Off-Street Parking Regulation Bylaw, and they're used to fund transportation infrastructure that supports walking, bicycling, public transit, or alternative forms of transportation. And the second one was the Climate Action Reserve Fund, and this was actually created through the consolidation of two reserve funds that we had, the Sustainability Reserve Fund and the Emissions Reduction Reserve Fund. And currently the contributions into this one are $165,000 from taxation, plus $325,000 from the Local Government Climate Action Program, and that's a 3-year funding commitment for that program. So this supports initiatives, plans, and projects that reduce the city's greenhouse gas emissions and support city in becoming carbon neutral. And of course, we had two that were repealed. So the ones I just mentioned, the Sustainability Reserve Fund and the Emissions Reduction Reserve Fund, those were repealed in 2021 as their annual funding was no longer adequate or was discontinued. The CARE program funded one of the reserves. And so these were consolidated into the new Climate Action Reserve Fund with a sustainable funding contribution. And we had one that was revised, so the 911 Reserve Fund. So this was revised to incorporate the changes of transitioning to the new service delivery model for the provision of fire dispatch services. So the reserve no longer falls under the Central Island 911 Dispatch Service Partnership, and therefore we had to update the bylaw to reflect that. And some other minor changes were the policy was put into the new city's policy format, and there was some minor tweaking to some of the reserve descriptions to provide more clarification on exactly what those were for. So that is, and going forward, the policy will be reviewed for every 4 years now, and staff are asking for the committee to approve the changes.
Very good. Thank you to you and to Ms. Fulla, whose name's on the report. Any questions, comments? I must admit, it always has a certain appeal to me, all our lovely little pots of money. It's the way my mother-in-law, when she was a stay-at-home mom in the 50s, used to handle taxes and all the big annual expenses, little separate bank accounts, just, you know, to go through those tough times because her husband was in logging in those days. And it's good public policy, and it was good for them too. Someone going to move the recommended motion? Councillor Hemmons, Councillor Manley seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next, council expenses for the 9 months ending 2022, September 30th. Ms. Mercer again.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this report provides a summary of all the year-to-date expenses for each council member as up to September 30th. 2022. So the information is compiled throughout the year and is included in the Statement of Financial Information or the SOFI report at the end of the year. So this is for information only, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. I believe you've all seen your listings of expenditures, but if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Manley.
What happens with a councillor going over their budgeted amount? See, there's one case of that.
Yep, through Your Worship to Councillor Manley. So my understanding is we are looking at, right now, there's very specific amounts for certain conferences or conference, And so we're looking at that to kind of make that more generic. So we look at what's the total budget, and generally, rarely do we go over that budget, but usually if there is an overage, that council has approved that, and we would fund that through other places in the budget.
So it's more of an indication of a councillor attending more conferences than some of the other conferences.
And we are working on making that less rigid in the budget.
Thank you.
I think it's fair to say, Councillor Manley, that attending FCM or AVICC or EBCM now is generally speaking substantially more than what was budgeted for practical purposes. And the public I asked them to pay attention to pages 239 to 258 of the report to see what council has actually spent. It's a pretty modest group, all things considered, and well within the budget. It's just a report. Thank you very much. If there's no questions or comments. The next is item K, financial results for the 9 months ended 2022, September 30th. Again, Ms. Mercer, please.
Thank you. So this report provides the committee with the financial results of the city as at September 30th, 2022. So the information includes both day-to-day operations as well as status updates on projects. So I'm going to start with the operating results, and then we'll talk briefly about projects. So for operating, at the end of quarter 3, we are projecting just over $6.1 million surplus for all three funds. So the breakdown on this is the general fund has about a $6.5 million surplus estimate. Sewer fund has $131,500 surplus estimate, and we are anticipating a $497,000 deficit for the water fund.
And that's because the good citizens of Nanaimo are being even more cautious with their water use, fair to say?
Partially, but we also had a very wet early spring, and so there wasn't as much water usage, and so that will have an impact on the revenues. So there's many factors that impact the water fund. So climate being one, usage being another. So that's why we're anticipating. Attachment A of the report gives a brief description of variances over $100,000, and Attachment B gives an overview of all operating variances by department.
Councillor Perino has a question.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So, you know, this is, I was having trouble reading this, understanding it all. But so the revenues on the water side at 18 million. 18.5 million, and the expenditures were 22. So, why were the expenditures so much higher? I'm sorry, you were talking about how we're using less water, but I'm not looking at that. It's from the operating fund. We spent more than we brought in.
So, through your worship to Councillor Perino, so the report shows the revenues and expenditures at September 30th.
Yes.
So, and the projection is what we think it's going to be at the end of the year. So we need to include some accruals for revenues in there. And so some of the expenditures kind of cover the whole year, but revenues are only up to a certain point.
Okay,
so
that's why.
It's a point in time. So then the projection is what we think we're going to be at the end of the year.
Okay, and one more question. So the 6.1 million goes into reserves?
So I'll get to that in a little bit.
Getting ahead. Thank you so much.
So for the general fund, the bulk of the surplus comes from multiple position vacancies throughout the city. So like all other sectors of the economy right now, the city is experiencing recruitment challenges, and this has resulted in a significant contribution to the surplus this year. We're working hard on getting those positions filled, but it is a challenge in the market today. And so that's the bulk of it comes from that. We are anticipating about $1.9 million in additional interest income this year. So with interest rates rising, we are able to secure better investment rates on our excess cash. So that is helping us in that area. We are expecting $321,000 in additional grant in lieu of taxes revenue. So there was a couple of additional properties that were paid grants in lieu on this year that we weren't anticipating. So just for reference, grants in lieu of taxes cover land and property owned by the provincial and federal governments. So that's office buildings, courthouses, jails, etc. We don't issue them a tax notice. They pay us on those properties in a grant in lieu instead of a levy. So we are anticipating $568,000 more in building inspection revenues. So as building continues to go at its rates, we're anticipating a bit more money there than we had budgeted for. The economic development area has a $582,000 contribution to surplus, and the variance is made up of position vacancy and the delay of the startup of the Nanaimo Prosperity Corporation. And the last item of the bigger items that have contributed is the RCMP contract. So we're anticipating about a $1.2 million surplus contribution there, and this is due to member vacancies. So we have budget for a certain number, and we've been unable to get those members in, so that has contributed to the surplus. So those are about the 6 big items that contribute mainly to the surplus. So for the sewer fund, the $131,500, we have some contingency in there and some small variances that make up that $131,000. And we've spoken to the water fund, but revenues are expected to be lower by $613,000, and that's offset slightly by some contingency budget as well as some position vacancies, and that's brought it down to the 497. So staff will bring a decision report to council in February or March of the new year that will provide surplus allocation options. So per the reserves policy, any reserve that has dropped below the minimum value balance will be topped up first using surplus. So we anticipate that we'll need $1.6 million for the RCMP contract reserve and $130,000 for the snow and ice control reserve to bring those up to their minimum balances. Just for the RCMP contract reserve, the reserve was used in 2022 to fund the renovations at the police station and annex buildings. So we drew that down, so now we have to bring it back up. And it is likely at the year end, the staff will be recommending that the remaining or a portion of the remaining surplus will be allocated to the General Financial Stability Reserve and be used to fund the new accounting standard for the asset retirement obligation liability. Now, Ms. Bates-Emer alluded to this in her presentation, that there is a new accounting standard, and we've spoken about this before. And the new standard comes into effect in 2023 and will require the city to record any legal obligation associated with retiring a capital asset.
Councillor Hemmons has a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. This section of the report stood out to me, and then hearing the auditor this morning again. So can you just tell me what a legal obligation associated with retiring tangible capital asset is?
I'll let Mr. Bailey discuss that because he's been involved with the review that's gone on for this. Okay.
Thank you, through the chair, to Councillor Hemmons. So a legal obligation, so the biggest component for the city is asbestos. So asbestos in our facilities. So when this PSAB standard comes in, the city will be having to record the cost of the removal of the asbestos in each of its facilities, even though we're not undertaking that activity now. That's a future obligation, and really what they're trying to do is they're trying to make municipalities accountable for that cost that they have to deal with at some point because it's a legal obligation now. So we have to basically take money out of our piggy bank now and sock that away and add that to the value of the asset, even though we're not shelling out cash for that asbestos removal.
Okay, thank you.
It has an impact on our financial statements because we have to fund it. So currently we don't know what that number is. We're working madly to try to get that number, and we'll have better information for you when we bring the surplus allocation report in the spring. So I will talk to projects now. So the purpose of this information is to provide the committee with an update on the status of 2022 projects as at September 30th. So, and this includes both operating and capital projects. And the projects are broken down into 4 status categories: complete or substantially complete, in progress, not started, or on hold or delayed. The total project budget is $149.6 million. And at September 30th, $93.8 million was spent or committed. So that's 62% of the budget, leaving $55.8 million still to be spent. So regarding the status of the project, we have 23% of our projects are complete or substantially complete, 52% are in progress, 14% are not started, and 11% are on hold or delayed. So attachment C to the report gives an overview of the projects in each division and highlights the bigger projects within each area. And so we're happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding this.
I'm not seeing any, except to say that this does reflect the nature of the rising expenditures and inflation impact on construction costs, I assume, is
yes,
amongst other things.
Yep.
And availability of contractors and all of those things that are supply chain and the things Mr. Sims talks about fairly regularly.
And so in the new year, we will bring the carry forward report, and that we'll have some discussion around that as well.
Mr. Sims, you wanted to comment, please?
Your Worship, thank you. I just moving to the front in case there was any questions, but truthfully, a number of the projects that were planned for 2022, just due to the market conditions, I think we talked about this numerous times. It's an opportunity to defer them till it made more sense and hope for better value in the new year. And the other often discussed point is that the finance year, for the fiscal year, is Jan 1 to December 31st, which has no bearing on when projects are done, but just when they're funded. Thank you, Your Worship.
So the bad news is we're having to defer more than we'd like. The good news is if the economy turns down, the city's expenditures will be welcomed by the construction community, and hopefully the prices will be a little more modest. Any other comments on this?
I will.
Councillor Thorpe, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Mr. Sims' last comment, that to me makes sense. If it's not financially viable or otherwise viable to proceed with a project totally right now, defer it until conditions are a bit more favorable in all aspects. My question is, by a deferral of any project at this point, would it have an impact on our budget deliberations for the coming year?
That's more of
Through your worship to Councillor Thorpe. It doesn't necessarily have any impact. So we will carry forward these, and these will be added to the project plan that's, new for 2023. Any funding that for these projects is carry forward. Most of it comes from reserves, so the money just stays in reserves and until it's needed for those projects. And so it doesn't, I guess the impact would be, can we do them all? Is more of that. It's not really a financial question at this point. It's more of unless things come in significantly over budget, and then we have to look at dropping projects or moving them out. But it's more a question of, can we do all of it? Would be my thought on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Your Worship, if I could also add, this is another one of those topics that I think Council needs to invest some time in the first quarter of next year. The whole thing around capital, financial and otherwise, and what's going on. So I think it would be a good time. I know there's been an expression of interest. We do that throughout the year. You recall last year there was big presentations and so forth with respect to largely recreation projects and the list, and there was a suite of those strategic projects, and I think we could do the same thing generally. The one thing that I would say is that we are proceeding with the biggest capital project we've done in a long time, notwithstanding this, and this is the water main project throughout the city, and this is not a small undertaking, and that by itself is a very major project that we need to be focused on, and we are, and Mr. Sims could update you on that. But notwithstanding the carry forwards, there is one very significant one. That's a multi-year project that is going ahead very fast, and it's very large sum of money. So we are doing capital, but that one has taken a large part of our resources to focus on. I would suggest actually give you an update on that at some point in time today or otherwise.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hammonds, no questions? Ms. Mercer, nothing further then on this?
No.
All right, thank you very much. And the last item is quarterly purchasing report, single and sole source purchases in excess of $250,000 and instances of non-compliance purchases. May I ask a question? Why do we always say non-compliance as opposed to non-compliant?
I'd like to HR, because I was just hit by the GM of Engineering and Public Works. So we have to, if something doesn't comply with, I'm just trying to explain how. So if we have $75,000 threshold, is anything over that needs to have a process, right? So if we have a project that originally was planned and it was under the $75,000, and due to extenuating circumstances, it goes beyond that and it's directly awarded to the contractor who's doing the work. That in essence is a non-compliance with the policy. So we don't have them very often, but occasionally we do, and it's mostly situations like that where there's unforeseen circumstances that bumps it over that threshold, and then it becomes non-compliant with the policy. Like I said, there are very few. Right, but it's a grammatical question. It says non-compliance purchases, is exactly. Oh, okay. That's why I've always wondered why we use that term, and I finally had the courage to ask just before Christmas. Instead of saying non-compliant purchases, we say non-compliance purchases. Yeah. Okay, we will get that changed for the next report because it comes every quarter. You don't have to. I just thought there might be some interesting explanation for it. Nope. I've watched it roll by for several years now and wondered why we don't say non-compliant. Yeah. Thank you. Well, there's a big improvement.
Well, Your Worship, it's non-compliance with the policy. It's non-compliance with the policy. I think that's where the intent is. The projects are non-compliant, but they're not in compliance with. So if that's the worst part of the report, I'm happy.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly aroused my interest.
The numbers are right. I can't guarantee anything on the words.
Is there a motion to change the report?
Yeah. So attachment 1 outlines the sole and single source purchases, and attachment 2 outlines purchases over $250,000. And there was no instance of non-compliance with the procurement policy for the quarter. So staff are here to answer any questions you might have with the items in the report.
Well, it appears that was the biggest problem, was compliant versus compliance.
I can live with that.
Not seeing any questions or comments. Thank you very much. We have no other business. We have no questions. Motion for adjournment. Moved, Councillor Hemmens, seconded Councillor Perino. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, and to everyone attending this morning.